They say you should never reveal all your cards at once. For 8 long years, I've lived by that rule, letting everyone think I was a struggling nobody. Even my wife, Sophia, the woman I thought I loved, had no idea who I really was. And that night, sitting on the corner of our leather sectional, sipping a glass of water like I didn't have a care in the world, I let them laugh. Sophia, with her flawless curls and that gleaming pearl necklace I bought her, was in her element. She loved playing hostess, especially to her circle of friends. Well, I called them her entourage. They were the type who'd wear designer dresses to a backyard barbecue just to outshine one another. And tonight, they'd found their entertainment for the evening. Me, Daniel, sweetheart, why don't you tell them about your latest job hunt? Sophia cooed, her tone syrupy sweet, but laced with the kind of venom only she could muster. The room erupted in laughter before I could even open my mouth. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, used me as the punchline to her jokes, but tonight she was really going for it. Maybe the new champagne had given her courage. Her best friend, Melissa, chimed in next. Honestly, Sophia, you're so patient. If my husband couldn't hold a steady job, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, it's not like Daniel's even trying, right? She gave me a look that could cut glass, and I forced a weak smile. That's the thing about playing a role. You have to commit, even when it stings. Inside, I wanted to laugh in their faces, to tell Melissa that her position as head of marketing was courtesy of me. I could see the resignation letter sitting in my drafts folder with her name on it. But I didn't. Not yet. Sophia leaned back, swirling her wine. Oh, Melissa, don't be too hard on him. At least he knows his way around the kitchen. The man makes a mean spaghetti, and someone has to do the dishes around here. More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, their chuckles bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of the house I paid for. The house they thought belonged to Sophia, courtesy of her supposed financial contributions. Funny how none of them noticed the cracks in her story. Did they think her part-time charity work funded this marble-floored palace? Or the luxury cars parked out front? No, but they believed what they wanted to believe because it was easier. And I let them. Sophia wasn't done yet, though. Remember that one time Daniel thought he could be a consultant? Oh, darling, you spent months preparing for that interview, didn't you? What was the company called again? Oh, right, Summit Innovations. They didn't even call him back? She erupted into laughter, clutching her sides like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That one hit close. She didn't know it, but that interview wasn't what she thought. It had been my routine quarterly check-in, an undercover review to ensure my managers were doing their jobs. I sat across the table from my own hiring team that day, silently judging them while they judged me. It was my way of keeping things in check. And now, my own wife had turned that into a joke. The rest of the night passed in a blur of cruel remarks, shared glances, and clinking glasses. They didn't see the way my grip tightened around my drink or notice the fire building behind my calm expression. That's the funny thing about people like them. They assume the quiet ones are weak. But weakness isn't silence. Weakness is thinking your throne is secure when it's built on lies. Eventually, Sophia waved me off to the kitchen, saying, "Be a dear and get us another bottle, won't you?" I stood and did as she asked, my face a mask of quiet submission. But as I walked away, I caught the words she whispered to Melissa. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. A man without ambition is just embarrassing. Embarrassing. That's what she called me. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. That night wasn't about reacting. It was about remembering. Every word they said, every laugh they shared, was fuel for what was to come. As I stood in the kitchen, uncorking another bottle of champagne I'd bought, I glanced at the clock. It was 9:47 p.m. Less than 12 hours until the board meeting. Less than 12 hours until their world came crashing down. Let them laugh tonight, I thought, because tomorrow, none of them would have anything to laugh about. I returned to the living room, placing the bottle on the coffee table like a dutiful husband. Sophia barely acknowledged me, too busy telling the room about her latest spa day. I sat back down, taking my place in the corner, invisible and insignificant in their eyes. But inside, I was smiling. Let them mock me. Let them think I'm nothing. Because when the clock struck 9 the next morning, they'd learn the truth. The man they belittled wasn't just their equal. He was their boss. It wasn't the first time Sophia had embarrassed me in front of her friends, but this night was a masterpiece of cruelty. She wasn't just hosting. She was putting on a show. Every smile, every joke, every exaggerated story was designed to put her on a pedestal and me 6 feet under. "Melissa," she began, swirling her wine like she was born holding a glass of vintage. "You should have seen Daniel last month. He came home so excited. He thought he'd found the perfect job listing." She leaned forward like she was sharing some scandalous secret. "He spent 3 hours on the application, pouring his heart and soul into it. And guess what?" She paused, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "They didn't even bother sending him a rejection email." The room erupted in laughter. I sat there, my face a carefully composed mask, nodding along like I was part of the joke. Inside, I was calculating. Every laugh, every insult. This wasn't just about me anymore. Sophia's friends were executives, middle management, and department heads at my company. They were the very people who prided themselves on being at the top, blind to the fact that their careers hung on the decisions of the man they were mocking. Sophia was relentless. She crossed her legs, flashing her Louboutins, the ones I bought, and gestured dramatically. "Honestly, I've tried everything to help him, you know? I even suggested he try barista work at the cafe down the street. At least he'd get tips." More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, clinking their glasses in agreement. For a moment, I considered saying something. I could have told them that cafe was one of many businesses I'd acquired under a shell company, that the very job she mocked was in a building I owned. But I stayed quiet. Timing was everything, and tonight wasn't the night to shatter their illusions. Sophia's smile widened as she turned her attention back to me. "What do you think, Daniel? Maybe you should listen to me for once." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if I were a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. "Maybe you're right. I'll look into it." She wasn't expecting that. I could see it in her eyes. She thrived on conflict, loved it when I pushed back, just enough to make myself look defensive. But giving her nothing? That threw her off. Still, she recovered quickly, tossing her hair over her shoulder like a queen dismissing a servant. "Good. It's about time." I sipped my water, letting her have the last word. Let her believe she'd won. The truth was, she'd been losing for years. She just didn't know it yet. As the night wore on, Sophia's arrogance only grew. She bragged about her charity work, making sure everyone knew she was the backbone of the family. "It's not easy being the only breadwinner," she said, her voice heavy with false humility. "But someone has to keep the lights on, right?" It took every ounce of restraint not to laugh out loud. The mortgage? Paid off years ago. The cars? Paid in full. Every single luxury she flaunted to her friends was courtesy of my money, funneled through accounts she didn't even know existed. But to her, I was just the man who couldn't land a job. The irony was almost too good. Sophia's friend, Angela, leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on Sophia's knee. "Honestly, babe, you're a saint for putting up with it. If my husband were that useless, I'd have left him ages ago." Sophia sighed dramatically, as if she were carrying the weight of the world. "Oh, believe me, I've thought about it. But then I remind myself, I married for love, not ambition." I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. Love? Was that what she called it? Because from where I stood, her love looked a lot like opportunism. She'd married me thinking I was a stepping stone, a man she could mold into the kind of success she could take credit for. But when I didn't fit the mold, she turned me into a project. Something to fix, or worse, pity. The night dragged on, each conversation more insufferable than the last. They talked about luxury vacations, designer brands, and the importance of networking. I sat there, nodding along, my presence barely acknowledged unless it was to set up the next joke at my expense. "Daniel, why don't you grab us another bottle of champagne?" Sophia asked sweetly, her smile as sharp as a blade. "You know where it is, right? In the wine fridge I bought?" The room erupted into another round of laughter. I stood, nodding politely, and headed to the kitchen. My fists clenched as I reached for the bottle, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't the time to react. This was the time to plan. As I uncorked the champagne, I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m. In less than 12 hours, the same people who mocked me tonight would walk into my office, completely unaware that their fates were already sealed. Sophia would wake up in a house she no longer controlled, her circle of friends decimated. And I'd finally step out of the shadows. I returned to the living room, placing the champagne on the table without a word. Sophia didn't even look at me. She was too busy holding court, basking in the glow of her imagined superiority. For a moment, I considered walking away, heading upstairs, and letting them have their fun. But no, I stayed. I watched. I listened. Every word, every insult, every smug laugh was another nail in the coffin of their delusions. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was powerless. But tomorrow, they'd learn the truth. The man they underestimated wasn't just their equal. He was their boss. And he was done playing nice. They didn't know it, but every laugh, every insult, every sideways glance they threw my way that night was fuel for what I had been preparing for years. The power I held wasn't in flashy displays or loud declarations. It was in patience, in knowing exactly when to strike. I learned that lesson the hard way, long before I ever met Sophia. 12 years ago, I was a different man. Back then, I didn't know what it felt like to be underestimated. I was young, ambitious, and full of hope. My father ran a small electronics business, a family legacy he poured everything into. We weren't wealthy, but we were proud. That pride crumbled the day corporate raiders came in, bought the business for pennies, and dismantled it overnight. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when they shut the doors for good. It wasn't just a business they took, it was his life's work. That moment shaped me. I swore I'd never let anyone take from me what they took from my father. I would build something unshakable, something untouchable. And I did. Summit Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in my tiny apartment, where I worked around the clock, teaching myself coding, business strategy, and finance. I started with small contracts, fixing software bugs for local companies, and used every dollar I earned to reinvest in my dream. By the time I was 28, Summit was growing faster than I could have imagined. By 30, it was a powerhouse. And by 35, it was a global leader. But success comes with its own challenges. The bigger you get, the more vultures circle. I'd already had 3 relationships implode by the time I met Sophia. Each one ended the same way. They saw my success as a golden ticket, something they could latch onto and ride to an easier life. So, when I met Sophia, I made a choice. I wouldn't let her see the real me. Not yet. When we met, I was in the middle of a corporate acquisition. I just finalized a deal worth millions. But I walked into that charity gala dressed in a suit I'd had for years and drove a car that wouldn't have looked out of place in a used lot. Sophia caught my eye instantly. She was beautiful, confident, and magnetic. But what stood out most was how she treated me. When she thought I was just a struggling consultant, she was sweet, supportive even. She told me, "You'll find your place, Daniel. Just keep trying." I believed her. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was different. We dated for a year before I proposed. By the time we got married, I thought I'd made the right choice. I moved her into the house she now calls hers, though I didn't tell her I owned it outright. I let her believe we were sharing everything, that we were building a life together. I even transferred money into her account monthly, so she could feel like she was contributing financially. At first, she was kind, but success changes people, or, more accurately, reveals them. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Sophia's patience turned into criticism. Her kind words became thinly veiled barbs. She started using my lack of ambition as a weapon, first in private arguments, then in front of others. I could have stopped her at any time, but I didn't. Instead, I let her think she was in control. I let her believe she was the reason we had this life. I even let her spend money recklessly, knowing every dollar she flaunted came from my hard work. What she didn't know was that I was always watching. I wasn't just building a company. I was building safeguards. Every shell company, every private account, every legal document was designed to protect what I'd built. Sophia had no idea that every extravagant vacation, Every luxury car, every designer dress was paid for by Summit Innovations, funneled through accounts she couldn't trace. And she definitely didn't know that her friends, her inner circle of so-called high achievers, were my employees. Sophia's best friend, Melissa, was the head of marketing. Angela ran human resources. Even the husbands, with their tailored suits and smug grins, were senior executives, all handpicked by me. They thought they were untouchable, climbing their corporate ladders, making decisions they thought were theirs. But the truth was, every promotion, every project, every so-called achievement they bragged about at dinner parties was orchestrated by me. I didn't just build Summit Innovations. I controlled it. And they were pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. As Sophia and her friends mocked me that night, I thought about the files locked in my study upstairs. Surveillance footage of drunken company events where they let their guards down. Expense reports showing their misuse of company funds. Recorded conversations detailing their questionable business strategies. They thought they were invincible, but they didn't realize they were being watched by someone who had planned for this moment for years. Sophia's mocking voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Daniel, are you even listening?" she said, laughing. "Honestly, I don't know how you expect to get anywhere if you're always daydreaming." I smiled, a small, calculated smile. "You're right," I said. "I should focus more." She nodded, satisfied, not realizing how true those words were. Because while she saw me as the failure in the room, I was the one holding all the power. And tomorrow, when I walked into my own company as more than just Sophia's husband, the illusion she had built would crumble. The truth about power is simple. It's not about how loudly you speak or how much you show off. Real power is quiet. It's patient. It's waiting for the exact moment when the people who underestimate you are at their most arrogant, and then showing them who you truly are. That night, as I carried another bottle of champagne into the living room, I knew I had reached my limit. The humiliation, the laughter, the dismissive looks, it had all added up over the years. But Sophia's final jab, the one she delivered with a smug grin while her friends clinked glasses, was the spark that lit the fuse. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can carry this marriage," she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the laughter. "I mean, I love him, but love doesn't pay the bills. I feel like I'm raising a grown child, not married to a man." Her friends gasped, not in shock but in mock sympathy. "You're so strong," Melissa said, placing a hand on Sophia's arm. "I don't know how you do it." "I keep telling her she deserves better," Angela added. "Someone ambitious. Someone who can match her energy." I paused in the doorway, bottle in hand, listening to the chorus of agreement. My grip tightened on the neck of the champagne. I'd heard enough. Every word, every insult, every patronizing comment, they were drilling into me, but not in the way they intended. Each jab didn't weaken me. It fortified me. I was done playing the role of the defeated husband. Tomorrow, I would end this charade. "Daniel, are you just going to stand there?" Sophia snapped, her tone sharp and impatient. "Bring it here already." I forced a smile, walking over and placing the champagne on the coffee table. "Sorry about that," I said softly, keeping my voice even. "Didn't mean to keep you waiting." "Of course you didn't," she said, barely looking at me. "You never do." That was it. I straightened up, looking around the room at the people who had spent the entire evening tearing me down. None of them met my eyes. They didn't need to. To them, I was invisible, unworthy of acknowledgement. But tomorrow, they'd be looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time. "I'm going upstairs," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Big day tomorrow." Sophia didn't even glance at me. "Good luck with that," she said, already turning back to Melissa. "Maybe this time he'll land something." The words hit like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I walked upstairs to the study, closing the door softly behind me. The sound of their laughter followed me, but I blocked it out. I had more important things to focus on. Inside the study, I locked the door and sat at my desk, taking a deep breath. The calm facade I had worn all night faded away, replaced by the cold determination that had driven me for years. I opened the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, revealing my secure workspace. 3 monitors lit up, displaying live feeds from the company, financial reports, and the personal files I'd gathered on Sophia and her friends. I started with Melissa, head of marketing. She had been siphoning funds from the department for years, disguising it as event planning expenses. The receipts in my files told a different story. Lavish vacations, personal shopping sprees, even a down payment on a car. It was all documented, every dollar accounted for. Angela was next. As head of HR, she had covered for executives who violated company policies, sweeping harassment complaints under the rug. Her emails, flagged by my team, were filled with thinly veiled threats to employees who dared to speak up. The husbands weren't any better. Greg, the VP of sales, had inflated quarterly figures to boost his bonuses. Scott, in operations, had been leaking proprietary information to competitors. And they all thought they were untouchable. And then there was Sophia, my wife, the woman who claimed to carry our marriage. She didn't work for the company directly, but she had benefited from it more than anyone. She had used my money to fund her image as a successful socialite, hosting charity events and galas, all while belittling me to anyone who would listen. But the part that stung the most was her betrayal. I had the evidence in front of me, messages exchanged with another man, flirtations at first, then full-blown plans for weekends away. She thought I didn't know. She thought I was too blind, too weak to see what was happening right under my nose. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The weight of everything, the lies, the manipulation, the mockery, it should have crushed me. But instead, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't angry. Anger was too simple, too fleeting. What I felt was purpose. Tomorrow wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back what was mine, about reclaiming the life and the company I had built from nothing. Sophia and her friends had spent years tearing others down, using their positions of power to enrich themselves at the expense of those beneath them. They thought they were untouchable, that their titles and connections made them invincible. But they were wrong. So very wrong. I reached for my phone, sending a message to Sarah, my most trusted executive. Everything is in place for tomorrow. Be ready. Her reply came within seconds. All set? They won't see it coming. I closed the hidden panel and leaned back, the faint hum of the monitors the only sound in the room. Downstairs, I could still hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the sound of their arrogance echoing through the house. But it didn't bother me anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think they'd won. Because tomorrow, the laughing would stop. As I sat there, I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd taught me after his business was destroyed. Success, he'd said, isn't about being loud. It's about being patient. It's about waiting for the right moment to act. And that moment was finally here. I smiled to myself, the calm before the storm settling over me. By this time tomorrow, Sophia and her friends wouldn't just see me differently. They'd finally see the truth. The man they mocked wasn't a failure. He wasn't a joke. He was their boss. The morning of the reckoning began like any other, but for me, it was far from ordinary. The house was eerily quiet as I dressed in a tailored navy suit, one of the few indulgences I kept tucked away for occasions like this. Sophia was still asleep, her careless confidence evident in the way she sprawled across the bed, oblivious to what was coming. For years, I'd let her believe she was in control, but today, I was taking it all back. At exactly 6 a.m., I left the house, stepping into a black town car waiting outside. My driver, Charles, nodded as I slid into the back seat. He didn't ask questions. He never did. But there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes when he noticed my unusually polished demeanor. "To Summit headquarters," I said simply. He nodded and pulled away, the hum of the engine steadying my nerves. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my most trusted executive and one of the few people who knew the truth about me. "Sarah, boardroom ready. Security briefed. Documentation finalized." Me, perfect. "Be sure the legal team is on standby." "Sarah, they've been briefed. Good luck." Luck wasn't a factor anymore. Everything had been meticulously planned, every detail accounted for. I leaned back in my seat, watching the city wake up around me. It was almost poetic, the world going about its business, unaware that, in a few hours, 5 people's lives would be irreversibly changed. When I arrived at the office, I entered through the private service entrance. It was one of many perks that came with being the CEO of Summit Innovations, though no one had ever seen me use it. That's how I liked it. Staying in the shadows, observing from a distance, letting my carefully chosen executives think they were running the show. But today, I wasn't staying in the shadows. Sarah was waiting for me in the security office. She handed me a visitor's badge with a faint smirk. Angela Martinez, it read, the fake name I used whenever I needed to go undercover within my own company. Everything is set, she said, motioning to the monitors displaying live feeds from various parts of the building. Your wife's friends are already here. Morning meetings are underway. I glanced at the screens, watching as Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott arrived one by one, laughing and chatting as if it were just another day. They had no idea what awaited them. Make sure the security team knows not to intervene unless instructed, I said. I don't want any disruptions. Sarah nodded. Understood. What about your wife? Sophia. My stomach tightened at the thought of her. She wasn't part of the corporate takedown, not directly. But what I had planned for her was just as thorough. She'll know soon enough, I said, brushing off the thought. Focus on the task at hand. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I took my position in the lobby. Dressed in my unremarkable disguise, I watched as the day's players arrived. Melissa breezed in first, her head held high, barking orders into her phone. Angela followed closely behind, pausing to greet the receptionist with a hollow smile. Greg and Scott arrived together, laughing about a round of golf they'd played the weekend before. They didn't notice me sitting there, flipping through a copy of Summit's annual report like a nervous job candidate. That was the beauty of staying invisible. They never looked twice. At 9 a.m. sharp, I made my way to the HR floor for my interview. It was a charade, of course, a test of how deeply the rot had spread. I wanted to see firsthand how my own hiring process had been corrupted under their leadership. Thomas, the HR representative, greeted me with a thin smile, clearly disinterested. This will be a quick assessment, he said, leading me into a small conference room. Just a few basic skills tests and a short interview. The skills test was almost laughable in its simplicity. I made intentional errors, fumbling with questions I could have answered in my sleep. Through the glass walls, I saw Melissa walking by, glancing into the room with a look of mild disdain. She didn't recognize me, of course. To her, I was just another nobody wasting her company's time. Thomas reviewed my work with a barely concealed smirk. Well, he said, his tone condescending, this is interesting. Let's move on to the interview. The panel interview was worse. 3 middle managers sat across from me, their expressions dripping with boredom. They fired off generic questions, barely listening to my answers. At one point, one of them leaned back in his chair and checked his phone mid-sentence. By the time it ended, I had more than enough evidence. The culture they had cultivated was rotten to its core, dismissive, arrogant, and completely detached from the values Summit Innovations was built on. At 10:15 a.m., I made my way to the executive conference room. It was time for the main event. Through the partially open door, I could hear them laughing, their voices carrying the same smug tone I'd endured the night before. You should have seen her face during the interview, Melissa was saying. She looked like she hadn't touched a computer in years. Oh, that's classic, Angela replied, her voice thick with amusement. No wonder HR keeps rejecting people. Where do these applicants even come from? My hand tightened on the doorknob, but I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the room, letting the door close behind me with a soft click. Their laughter died instantly as they turned to face me. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the flicker of recognition as they tried to place me. Actually, I said, my voice steady and deliberate, I think it's time we had a real conversation. Melissa blinked, her brow furrowing. Who are you, and what are you doing here? I smiled, taking a seat at the head of the table, the seat that had always been mine. I'm Daniel Carter, I said, CEO of Summit Innovations. And as of this morning, your boss. The room fell silent, their faces a mix of shock, disbelief, and fear. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my words sink in. Let's begin. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Melissa's confident smirk faltered first, giving way to confusion and then panic. Angela looked as if she'd seen a ghost, while Greg and Scott sat frozen, their bravado evaporating as realization crept in. I let the tension build, savoring the moment. They didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or beg for forgiveness. Melissa recovered first, or at least tried to. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You? The CEO? That's impossible." "Impossible?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "Melissa, you've worked at this company for 6 years, and in all that time, you've never thought to question who signs your paychecks. You never bothered to wonder who approved your promotions or overlooked your creative accounting practices. But let me assure you, it's not only possible, it's the truth." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Instantly, the monitors on the walls flickered to life, displaying Summit Innovations' original incorporation documents. There, in bold print, was my name, Daniel Carter, founder and CEO. Beneath it was my photo, a younger version of me, smiling confidently. The same man who now sat at the head of the table, watching their world crumble. "I built this company from the ground up," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Long before any of you were here. Every policy, every division, every success you've taken credit for, it all started with me." Angela's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But you're," she stammered, struggling to find the words. "Ain't nobody?" I finished for her. "A man who couldn't even land an entry-level position? That's what you all thought, isn't it? That I was just Sophia's failure of a husband, clinging to the scraps of her so-called success." Greg finally found his voice, though it was shaky at best. This has to be a mistake. There's no way you've been running things. We would have known." "Would you?" I raised an eyebrow, tapping my phone again. The monitors now displayed a series of emails, financial reports, and surveillance footage. Each file was damning, a testament to their years of misconduct. "You were too busy inflating sales figures, covering up harassment complaints, and funneling company money into your personal accounts to notice who was really in charge." Scott, usually the loudest of the group, sat pale and silent. I turned my attention to him. "Scott, tell me, how's your golf game? Still playing on company time? Using the Summit corporate card to cover your rounds?" His jaw dropped, but no words came out. "And Greg," I continued, turning to the man next to him, "those quarterly sales bonuses you've been bragging about at every dinner party? They're based on fraudulent reports. I have every fabricated number right here." I gestured to the monitors. "Would you like me to show the board?" Greg slumped in his chair, his hands covering his face. Angela tried a different tactic. "Look, Daniel, Mr. Carter. This has been a misunderstanding. I've always respected you. I mean, the company. And if there's anything we can do to fix this..." I cut her off with a cold smile. "Fix it? Angela, you've spent years burying complaints, silencing employees, and fostering a toxic culture. You didn't respect anything except your own comfort." Melissa, ever the opportunist, leaned forward, her tone pleading. "Daniel, we didn't know. If we'd known, we never would have." "Mocked me?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "Laughed at me? Treated me like dirt in my own house?" I stood, planting my hands firmly on the table. "Ignorance isn't an excuse. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You thought I was beneath you. And now, you'll face the consequences." I tapped my phone one last time, and the screen behind me changed again. This time, it displayed their termination letters, each one signed and dated. "Effective immediately, you're all fired. Your access to company accounts and systems has been revoked. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises." "No, no, no," Greg muttered, shaking his head. "You can't do this." I locked eyes with him. "I just did." Angela stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is outrageous. We'll sue." You'll what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Sue me for firing you with cause? For exposing the fraud, the theft, the harassment you've swept under the rug? Be my guest, Angela. But I promise you, I have more evidence than you have excuses. The door opened, and 2 security guards stepped inside. Take them to HR for their exit interviews, I said, my tone icy. Make sure they understand the terms of their severance, or lack thereof. One by one, they stood, their confidence shattered. Melissa glared at me as if her anger could undo everything. Angela looked like she was holding back tears. Greg and Scott shuffled out without a word, their heads hanging low. Just as they reached the door, I called out, "Oh, and one more thing." They turned to face me, hope flickering in their eyes. "Don't bother reaching out to competitors. Your non-compete agreements are still in effect. And trust me, I'll be watching." The guards escorted them out, and the door closed behind them with a satisfying finality. For a moment, the room was silent again. I let out a slow breath, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Sarah entered moments later, her tablet in hand. "Well," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, "that went about as expected." "Good," I replied, straightening my suit. "Now, let's prepare for the board meeting. There's still work to do." As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't just the man behind the scenes. I was Daniel Carter, CEO of Summit Innovations, and I had just reminded them all exactly who I was. I don't think anyone truly understands the satisfaction of watching the mighty fall until it's their hand holding the lever. As I walked back to my private office, I replayed the looks on their faces in my mind. Melissa, Angela, Greg, Scott. They thought they were invincible, untouchable, but I'd torn away their illusions in a matter of minutes. And now, it was time for the aftermath. Sarah was already waiting for me when I arrived, her tablet filled with updates and reports. "The termination process is underway," she said, her tone brisk but professional. "HR is processing their files, and security is clearing their offices." Melissa tried to call someone from the marketing team on her way out, but we've already disabled her phone and email access. I nodded, sitting behind my desk. "Good. Make sure all communications are monitored. I don't want any attempts to leak information or contact clients." "Already done," Sarah replied. "And one more thing. Angela demanded to see the board before she left. She claims she's being wrongfully terminated." I smirked, leaning back in my chair. Wrongful termination? Angela covered up harassment cases, manipulated HR records, and created a culture of fear. Let her try to spin that. I doubt the board will be sympathetic. Sarah smiled faintly, a rare crack in her usually stoic demeanor. "I didn't think so, but I figured I'd let you know." By noon, the fallout was well underway. Security cameras showed Melissa pacing the parking lot, shouting into her phone. Greg sat slumped on the curb, staring at the ground. Scott had already left, his face pale and his shoulders hunched as he walked toward his car. Angela, of course, had been escorted out kicking and screaming, her righteous indignation falling on deaf ears. It was a fitting end for people who had spent years wielding their power to tear others down. And the best part? They still didn't fully understand the scope of what I had done. I pulled up my laptop and opened the live feeds from their exit interviews. Each one was being recorded, of course, for legal purposes. Melissa sat across from the HR representative, her voice tight with anger as she tried to negotiate her severance. "This is ridiculous," she said, slamming her hand on the table. "I've been with this company for years. You can't just fire me." The HR representative didn't flinch. "Your termination is for cause," she replied calmly. "Per your contract, you forfeit severance and stock options under these circumstances. The documentation is all here." Melissa's face turned red as she flipped through the file in front of her. "This is absurd. Cause? What cause?" "Fraudulent expense reports," the representative said, her voice steady. "Unauthorized use of company funds. Gross misconduct." Melissa leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "This isn't over," she muttered. Oh, but it was. Greg's interview was next. He didn't argue as much as Melissa, but his desperation was just as evident. "Look, I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice low. "But you don't have to do this. I've got a family to support." The HR representative gave him the same calm explanation. "Your termination is for cause. You will not receive severance or stock options. He hung his head, muttering under his breath. This can't be happening. Angela was the last. True to form, she came in swinging. This is discrimination, she shouted, pointing a finger at the HR representative. You can't do this to me. I've done nothing wrong. The representative remained unfazed. We have extensive documentation of your actions, including emails, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies. You were complicit in covering up harassment complaints and retaliating against employees who came forward. That is grounds for immediate termination. Angela sputtered, her indignation turning into disbelief. I want to speak to Daniel. The representative glanced at the camera, then back at Angela. Mr. Carter has already approved this termination. The decision is final. By the time their interviews were over, their access had been revoked, their emails archived, and their personal belongings packed up and delivered to their cars. Sarah confirmed the process had gone smoothly. They're officially out, she said, placing her tablet on my desk. The office feels lighter already. I smiled. It's amazing how much dead weight can drag a place down. But the day wasn't over yet. There was still one more person who needed to face the consequences. Sophia. At 1:30 p.m., just as I was reviewing the final reports from HR, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. Her name flashing on the screen brought a mix of emotions. Anger, disappointment, and, oddly enough, relief. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I let it ring for a few seconds before answering. Hello, Sophia. Daniel, she snapped, her voice sharp and impatient. What the hell is going on? Melissa just called me. She said you fired her and half the executive team. Is this some kind of joke? No joke, I said calmly. Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott were all terminated this morning. It was a long time coming. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. You can't do that, she said finally, her voice trembling. They're your employees, my friends. You had no right. No right? I leaned back in my chair, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at my lips. Sophia, I own the company. I have every right. Her sharp intake of breath was almost satisfying. What are you talking about? For 8 years, I've let you believe I was just some aimless, unemployed husband. But the truth is, I built Summit Innovations from the ground up. Every decision, every success, every dollar you've spent came from me. And now, I've finally taken out the trash. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, I said coldly. You lied to yourself. And now, you're about to see what happens when the truth finally comes out. I hung up, leaving her in stunned silence. There was more to say, much more. But that conversation could wait. For now, I had a company to run. When Sophia stormed into the Summit Innovations headquarters later that afternoon, the receptionist didn't even have time to stop her. She marched past the front desk and headed straight for the executive suite, her heels clicking angrily against the polished floors. I was waiting for her, seated calmly at my desk, reviewing the final files from the day's terminations. The door burst open, and there she was, my wife, looking every bit the picture of indignation. Her perfectly styled hair, her designer handbag swinging in her hand, and the fury in her eyes might have intimidated someone else. Not me. Daniel, she said, her voice sharp and demanding. What in the world is going on? I didn't look up immediately. I took my time, finishing the last line of a report before closing the folder and setting it neatly on my desk. When I finally met her gaze, I spoke with deliberate calmness. Good afternoon, Sophia. What brings you here? What brings me here? She repeated, her voice rising. I just got a call from Melissa, crying hysterically, telling me you fired her, and Angela and Greg and Scott. You've lost your mind. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. Have I? Or have I finally decided to clean up the mess they've made of my company? Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the words. Your company? She scoffed, shaking her head. What are you talking about? Summit isn't yours. It is, I said, my voice steady. It always has been. For a moment, she was silent, the weight of my statement sinking in. Then she laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to, what? Scare me? Humiliate me? I stood, walking around the desk and stopping just a few feet from her. Do you remember the house we live in, Sophia? The one you've always called our home? I paid for it, outright. And the cars, the trips, the charity galas. You thought your part-time work covered all that? No. Every luxury you've ever flaunted was funded by Summit Innovations. My company. Her face paled, and her hand tightened around her handbag. You're lying. Am I? I walked back to my desk and tapped a button on my laptop. The monitor on the wall behind me lit up, displaying the incorporation documents for Summit Innovations, complete with my name as founder and CEO. You've been living off my success for years, Sophia. And while you were busy mocking me, I was busy building an empire. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. You lied to me, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't lie, I said coldly. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. You saw what you wanted to see. A man you could pity, control, and belittle. You never once stopped to question why everything seemed to come so easily, why the bills were always paid, or why your lifestyle never matched what you thought we could afford. You never cared enough to dig deeper. Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of anger. You humiliated me in front of my friends. You destroyed them. I raised an eyebrow. Destroyed them? No, Sophia. They destroyed themselves. Melissa was stealing from the company. Angela covered up harassment complaints. Greg falsified sales figures, and Scott leaked proprietary information to competitors. They weren't your friends. They were parasites. Just like you. The word hit her like a slap, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she straightened her spine, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. You've gone too far, Daniel, she said, her voice icy. You think you can just humiliate me like this? You'll regret it. I let out a short laugh. Regret it? Sophia, for years, I've endured your mockery, your condescension, and your utter lack of respect. You made me the punchline of your jokes, parading me around as a failure while you basked in a life I built. The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. Her anger boiled over then. You can't do this to me, she hissed. We're married. I'm entitled to half of everything. I walked back to my desk, opened another folder, and pulled out a stack of papers. I placed them on the table between us and slid them toward her. That's where you're wrong. You signed a prenuptial agreement when we got married. It ensures that everything I built before and during our marriage remains mine. Your entitlement ends today. She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You're divorcing me, she whispered. I am, I said without hesitation. And before you even think about contesting it, know this. I've already spoken to the best divorce attorneys in the city. None of them will take your case. Your access to the joint account has been revoked, and your spending spree stops now. Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation set in. Daniel, please, she said, her voice breaking. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it. Your crocodile tears won't work on me anymore, Sophia. For years, I gave you everything. More than you deserved, and you repaid me with mockery and betrayal. I'm done. She stood there, stunned and silent, as I opened the door. Security will escort you out, I said, motioning to the two guards waiting outside. Take whatever dignity you have left and leave. Daniel, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean. Goodbye, Sophia, I said, turning back to my desk. And good luck. You'll need it. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was free from her manipulations, her lies, and her cruelty. I had reclaimed my life, my company, and my self-respect. Sophia's downfall wasn't just the end of a toxic marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me. And as I sat back in my chair, watching the sun set over the city skyline, I knew that this was only the start. The day after Sophia's departure, the atmosphere at Summit Innovations was electric. The toxic fog that had lingered for years was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. As I walked into the office that morning, employees stopped to greet me. Not with the stiff politeness reserved for their supposed CEO's husband, but with genuine smiles and nods of respect. For the first time, they were seeing me for who I truly was, the man who had built this company from nothing. Sarah met me at my office, her ever-present tablet in hand. "We've finalized the reorganization plans," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "The departments affected by Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott are already seeing improvements. Productivity is up 25% in some areas." "Good," I replied, taking the tablet from her and scanning the data. "What about the employees who left because of them? Any word?" "We've reached out to everyone who filed complaints or resigned due to harassment or discrimination," Sarah said. 12 have already accepted reinstatement offers. The others are considering it. "Make sure they know they'll be walking into a very different environment," I said. "I want them to feel safe here. Valued." Sarah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Understood." That afternoon, I held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium, a first for me. For years, I had avoided the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes. But now, it was time to step forward and address the people who had kept Summit Innovations running, even under the shadow of corruption. As I stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. I gripped the edges of the podium, taking a moment to steady myself before speaking. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice carrying easily through the microphone. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Summit Innovations." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, but I continued. "Over the past several years, I've stayed in the background, observing how this company has grown and changed. And while I've seen incredible talent and innovation, I've also seen things that deeply disappointed me. A culture of fear, favoritism, and dishonesty took root here, and I take responsibility for not addressing it sooner." The room was completely silent now, every pair of eyes fixed on me. "But that ends today," I said firmly. "The people responsible for that culture are gone. And moving forward, this company will be a place where everyone, regardless of their position, feels valued, respected, and empowered." I outlined our new initiatives: anonymous feedback channels, enhanced HR protocols, and mentorship programs for employees who wanted to grow within the company. I spoke about accountability and collaboration, about building a culture of trust and innovation. And when I finished, the room erupted into applause. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not just of what I had built, but of what it was becoming. Over the next few months, the transformation was remarkable. Departments that had been bogged down by inefficiency and favoritism began to thrive. Jennifer, a brilliant programmer who had left after being sidelined by Melissa, returned to lead our new AI division. Under her leadership, we filed 5 patents in 6 months, more than the company had in the past 3 years. The Thompson account, one of our largest clients, doubled their contract with us, citing our new leadership and transparency initiatives as key factors. Other clients followed suit, and our revenue soared. But the most rewarding part wasn't the financial success. It was seeing the employees flourish. People who had once been afraid to speak up now shared ideas openly. Collaboration replaced competition. And for the first time, Summit Innovations felt like the company I had always envisioned. As for Sophia and her friends, their downfall was swift and brutal. The evidence I had gathered against them was airtight, leaving no room for retaliation. Melissa and Angela's reputations were in tatters, their misconduct exposed to every potential employer. Greg and Scott faced lawsuits for fraud and breach of contract, their careers effectively over. Sophia, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. She moved out of the house within a week of our confrontation, her pride too wounded to fight me in court. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the ironclad prenuptial agreement. I later heard she was staying with her sister, trying to piece together a life that didn't revolve around appearances and materialism. For a while, I thought about her often, not with anger, but with a strange sense of relief. In the end, she had done me a favor. Her betrayal had forced me to confront the cracks in my life and take back control. And for that, I was grateful. 6 months after the shakeup, I stood in my office, looking out over the city. The skyline was painted in hues of gold and orange as the sun set, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Sarah knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. "Final numbers are in," she said, handing me a report. "Profits are up 60%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and the mentorship program has a waiting list." I smiled, setting the report down. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when you get rid of the dead weight." Sarah chuckled softly. "There's one more thing," she said. "The press is still asking for an interview. They want to know how you managed to pull off such a perfect transformation." I shook my head. "Let the results speak for themselves. I'm not interested in publicity." She nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the door. "Any regrets?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. I thought about it for a moment. About Sophia's mockery, the betrayal of her friends, and the years I had spent hiding in the shadows. But then I thought about the company we had rebuilt, the people who were thriving, and the future that lay ahead. "No," I said finally. "No regrets. Just lessons." In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying what was broken. It was about rebuilding something better. And as I stood there, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, I knew that Summit Innovations wasn't just a company anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the power of starting over. And I was ready for whatever came next. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby," my wife yelled as I lay motionless on the ground. My wife's brother stood smirking while her sister accused me of ruining her birthday. But when the paramedic saw I couldn't move my legs, she immediately called for police backup. The MRI would reveal. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and immediately know you don't belong? That's exactly how I felt standing on Marissa's pool deck, watching the rain droplets still clinging to the fancy outdoor furniture like they were scared to let go. Hell, I didn't blame them. I was scared to let go too, but not of some overpriced patio chair. I was scared of what this whole damn party represented. The concrete under my work boots was slick, and I kept shuffling toward the edge of the pool area, trying to blend into the background like I always did at these family gatherings. My steel-toed boots felt completely out of place against all the designer sandals and boat shoes scattered around the deck. Everyone else looked like they'd stepped out of some country club catalog, and here I was in my wrinkled khakis and company polo, still smelling like the warehouse from my double shift that morning. Tracy was across the yard, and damn if she didn't look right at home with her people. She had that laugh going. You know the one, where she throws her head back and shows off those perfect white teeth her daddy paid for. She was clutching some fancy cocktail that probably cost more than I made in a day, standing next to her brother Brent and sister Marissa like they were posing for a magazine spread. The golden children, all three of them, with their perfect lives and perfect problems. I should have stayed home. Should have told Tracy I was too tired, too busy, too whatever. But you don't say no to the Hendersons when they're throwing a party. Not if you're married to one of them anyway. Not if you want to keep the peace in your own house. The party was in full swing around me. Kids splashing in the pool, adults networking over wine and cheese that had names I couldn't pronounce. I recognized most of the faces from previous family gatherings, but recognition doesn't equal belonging. These people knew exactly what I was. Tracy's blue-collar husband who didn't quite fit their mold. The guy who fixed things and moved boxes while they moved money and made deals. I was minding my own business, really I was. Just standing there watching the water ripple in the pool, thinking about how much overtime I'd need to pull to afford the electric bill this month, when I saw him coming. Brent, that swagger of his that screamed privilege and entitlement from 50 yards away. He had that look in his eyes, the same one he'd had since the day I married his sister. That look that said he was about to have some fun, and I was going to be the entertainment. Everett, his voice cut through the party chatter like a knife through butter. There's my favorite brother-in-law. Favorite and only, but who's counting? I forced a smile and gave him a nod. Hey, Brent. Hell of a party. You know what this party needs. He was grinning now, that shark-like smile that made my stomach twist. Some excitement. Some real fun. I could feel the eyes on us already. The other guests sensing something was about to happen, turning to watch like we were the main event. This was how it always went with Brent. He needed an audience for his games, needed witnesses to his dominance. And I was always his favorite target. Come on, Everett, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's show these people some real fun. I took a step back, my boots scraping against the wet concrete. I'm good, man. Really, just enjoying the party. But Brent wasn't taking no for an answer. He never did. That's when I felt his hand clamp down on my arm. Not friendly, not playful, but possessive, like I was his property to do with as he pleased. No, 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 I said, trying to keep my voice calm, trying not to make a scene. Brent, I'm in my work clothes, man. I don't want to. Don't be such a buzzkill. Tracy's voice cut through my protests like she was scolding a child. She didn't even look up from her conversation, just waved her hand dismissively in my direction. It's Marissa's day, Everett. Stop being so damn dramatic. Dramatic. That was always her word for me when I tried to set boundaries, when I tried to say no to her family's idea of fun, when I didn't want to be the butt of their jokes or the target of their games. Dramatic. Marissa chimed in from across the deck, her voice sharp with irritation. Seriously, Everett, can you just go along with something for once? This is supposed to be my special day. The crowd was watching now, all of them, waiting to see what would happen next, waiting to see if I'd be a good sport or if I'd ruin the party with my drama. The pressure was suffocating, but it was familiar too. This was how it always went in Tracy's family. You played along with their games, or you were the problem. Brent's grip tightened on my arm. See, even the birthday girl wants you to have some fun. Come on, little brother. Little brother. I was 34 years old, but to Brent, I'd always be the little brother who needed to be put in his place. The outsider who needed reminding of where he stood in the family hierarchy. Brent, please. I tried one more time, but my voice was drowned out by his laughter and the encouraging calls from the crowd. Someone shouted, do it. Someone else was already pulling out their phone to record whatever was about to happen. That's when Brent spun me. Hard. Like I was a toy, like I weighed nothing at all. The world tilted sideways, and I felt my feet leave the ground. For a split second, I was airborne, completely at the mercy of momentum and gravity and Brent's idea of entertainment. I wasn't a child. I was a grown man with responsibilities and bills and a bad back from years of warehouse work. But in that moment, spinning through the air with the sound of laughter filling my ears, I felt as helpless as a kid being bullied on a playground. The edge of the pool was right behind me. I could see it rushing toward me as I spun, could see the concrete steps that led down into the water. Hard, unforgiving concrete that didn't care about birthday parties or family dynamics or keeping the peace. This was supposed to be just a joke, right? Just Brent being Brent, just family fun that I'd laugh about later. That's what Tracy would say afterward, what they'd all say. Just harmless fun that went a little too far. But as I felt Brent's hands release me, as I felt myself falling backward toward those concrete steps, I knew this wasn't going to be funny at all. You ever have one of those moments where everything slows down like you're watching it happen to someone else? That's exactly what it felt like when Brent let go of me. 1 second I was spinning through the air like some kind of twisted carnival ride, and the next I was watching myself fall backward in what felt like slow motion. My arms were flailing, trying to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing but empty air and the sound of people laughing. The laughter was the worst part, not the falling, not even the fear of what was coming, but hearing all these people finding my terror hilarious. Like my panic was the punchline to some joke I wasn't in on. I could see Tracy from the corner of my eye as I spun, still holding that damn cocktail, still wearing that expression like I was embarrassing her just by existing. Her lips were moving, probably complaining to whoever would listen about how I always had to make everything about me. Classic Tracy. Even when I was literally falling through the air, she made it about how it affected her. Time stretched like taffy as I stumbled mid-spin, my work boots trying to find purchase on the wet concrete, but finding nothing but slick surface and gravity pulling me down. My body was completely off balance, arms windmilling uselessly as I realized with crystal clarity exactly where I was headed. The concrete steps. Jesus Christ, the concrete steps. I'd noticed them earlier when I was trying to stay out of everyone's way. 3 sharp-edged steps leading down into the shallow end of the pool. Expensive-looking stone, probably some fancy Italian marble that cost more than my truck. Beautiful to look at, but hard as hell and completely unforgiving. My back hit those steps with a sound I'll never forget. Not a thud, not a splash, but a crack. A sharp, definitive crack that seemed to echo across the entire yard like a gunshot. The kind of sound that makes everyone stop talking, even if just for a second. But they didn't stop talking. They didn't even stop laughing. The pain was immediate and absolute. Not like when you bang your shin on a coffee table or stub your toe. This was different. This was my entire world suddenly narrowing down to one single point of agony that radiated out from my lower back like lightning. I tried to suck in air, but my lungs felt like they'd forgotten how to work. I was lying there on those damn steps, half in the pool, half out, my work shirt soaked through and clinging to my skin. The water was warm against my back, but I couldn't feel anything below my waist. Nothing. Like someone had just erased the bottom half of my body. Walk it off, Everett. Tracy's voice cut through the haze of pain and shock. She was actually shouting at me, her voice sharp with irritation and embarrassment. You're embarrassing us. Don't be such a baby. A baby. I couldn't feel my legs, couldn't breathe properly, and she was calling me a baby in front of all her friends and family. I tried to turn my head to look at her, try to make her understand that something was seriously wrong, but she wasn't even looking at me. She was looking at her guests, probably trying to gauge how much damage control she'd need to do. Marissa's voice joined in from somewhere near the patio. Of course, she said, her tone dripping with frustration. Of course he pulls this drama on my birthday. My one special day, and he has to make it all about him. My one special day? Like I'd planned this. Like I'd asked Brent to grab me and throw me into her fancy pool steps just to steal her thunder. The absurdity of it would have been funny if I could feel anything below my waist. I tried to speak, tried to tell them that something was really wrong, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. I can't move my legs. The words hung in the air for a moment, but nobody seemed to hear them over the sound of their own complaints and excuses. Brent was somewhere behind me, probably trying to figure out how to spin this into another joke. The other guests were starting to drift back to their conversations, the entertainment apparently over. But then everything changed. Samantha, one of Marissa's friends who I'd barely noticed before, suddenly appeared beside me. While everyone else was bitching and moaning about their ruined party, she was actually looking at me. Really looking, with the kind of focused attention that made me realize she wasn't just another country club princess. Hey, she said, her voice calm but urgent as she knelt down next to me. Hey, can you hear me? I nodded, or tried to. Everything felt disconnected, like my head was floating separately from the rest of me. I need you to try something for me, okay? Her hands were moving over my legs, checking for something I couldn't understand. Can you feel this? She pressed down on my shin, then my thigh, then my ankle. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Can you wiggle your toes for me? I tried. God, I tried so hard. I stared down at my feet, willing them to move, concentrating every ounce of energy I had left on just making my toes twitch. But it was like sending signals to a phone that had been disconnected. The message wasn't getting through. Samantha's face went white. Not pale, not concerned white. The color drained out of her cheeks so fast, it was like watching someone pull the plug on a bathtub. Nobody touch him, she said, her voice suddenly carrying the kind of authority that made everyone stop what they were doing. Nobody move him at all. The laughter died. Finally, blessedly, the laughter died. What's wrong with him? Tracy's voice had changed now, less irritated and more worried. Like maybe she was starting to realize this wasn't just me being dramatic. This could be spinal, Samantha said, already pulling out her phone. This could be really, really bad. Spinal. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew what that meant, even through the shock and pain. I'd seen enough movies, heard enough stories. Spinal meant wheelchairs. Spinal meant never walking again. The concrete steps were still digging into my back, but I couldn't feel them anymore. Couldn't feel the warm pool water lapping at my sides. Couldn't feel my legs at all. Just dead weight. Just nothing. The shift in the air was instant. One moment, everyone was treating this like some slapstick comedy routine, and the next, Samantha's voice cut through the party chatter like a scalpel through skin. Everyone back up. Now. She wasn't asking. She was commanding, and something in her tone made even Brent shut his mouth for once. I mean it. Get away from him. Nobody touches him. Nobody moves him. Nobody does anything. I was still lying there on those concrete steps, feeling like I was watching this whole scene unfold from somewhere outside my own body. The pool water was getting warmer around me, or maybe I was just getting colder. Hard to tell when half your body has basically gone offline. Samantha was crouched next to me, her hands hovering over me, but not quite touching, like I was some kind of bomb that might go off if she made the wrong move. Her face was dead serious now, none of that polite party smile she'd been wearing earlier. "What's your name?" she asked me, her voice steady and professional. "Everett," I managed to croak out. My voice sounded weird, like it was coming from someone else's throat. "Okay, Everett. I'm Samantha. I'm a paramedic, and I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay very, very still. Can you do that for me?" A paramedic. Thank God. Finally, someone who knew what the hell they were doing instead of just standing around making jokes about my pain. "Can you feel this?" She touched my leg again, pressing firmly against my calf. I stared down at her hand, willing myself to feel something, anything. But it was like watching someone touch a mannequin. I could see it happening, but there was no sensation, no connection between what my eyes were seeing and what my body should have been feeling. "No," I whispered. "Nothing." She nodded grimly and pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, Brent decided to open his big mouth again. "Come on, Sam," he said with that forced laugh that meant he was starting to get nervous. It was just horseplay. Guys probably just winded, you know? Maybe pulled a muscle or something. Horseplay. Jesus Christ, he was still calling it horseplay. Samantha didn't even look at him. "Brent, I need you to shut up and step back. Right now." "Hey, there's no need to be. There's every need." Her voice was ice cold. "You just threw a grown man backward into concrete steps. He can't feel his legs. This is not horseplay. This is a medical emergency. And if you don't get out of my way so I can help him, I'm going to have you arrested for interfering with medical care." That shut him up real quick. Brent's face went from cocky to pale in about 2 seconds flat. Good. Maybe now he was starting to understand that this wasn't just another one of his stupid pranks. Tracy, on the other hand, was still in full denial mode. She came stumbling over, that cocktail still clutched in her perfectly manicured hand like it was some kind of security blanket. "Samantha, don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" She was using that voice, the one she used when she was trying to manage a situation without actually dealing with it. Everett's always been prone to, making things seem worse than they are. He's probably just tired from work. Tired from work. Like exhaustion was what made your legs stop working. "Ma'am," Samantha said without looking away from me, "your husband has suffered what appears to be significant spinal trauma. He has no sensation or movement in his lower extremities. This is not fatigue. This is not dramatics. This is a potential life-altering injury that requires immediate medical intervention." Life-altering injury. The words hit me like another punch to the gut. I knew it was bad, but hearing it spelled out like that by someone who actually knew what they were talking about made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Samantha was already dialing 911, holding the phone to her ear with one hand while keeping the other positioned near me, ready to stop anyone who might try to move me. "This is Samantha Rodriguez, off-duty paramedic," she said into the phone, her voice crisp and professional. "I need an ambulance at 1247 Oakwood Drive. Adult male, approximately 34 years old, possible spinal cord injury following blunt force trauma to the lumbar region. Patient is conscious and alert, but reports complete loss of sensation and motor function in both lower extremities." The way she talked, so calm, so precise, it was both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. Reassuring because finally someone was taking this seriously, terrifying because the clinical language made it sound even worse than I'd thought. "No, do not attempt to move the patient," she continued into the phone. Mechanism of injury was a backward fall onto concrete steps following forceful spinning motion. "Yes, I'll stay on the line." Tracy was starting to pace now, her heels clicking against the wet concrete like a metronome counting down to disaster. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's going to be fine. He's always fine. This is just Everett being Everett." But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Maybe she was finally starting to realize that her husband lying motionless in a pool wasn't normal, even for me. Marissa was standing off to the side, arms crossed, looking like someone had just canceled Christmas. "I can't believe this is happening at my party," she said to no one in particular. "This was supposed to be perfect. Perfect. Right. because my potential paralysis was really just an inconvenience to her birthday celebration. The other guests were starting to cluster together in small groups, whispering among themselves and shooting glances in my direction. Some looked concerned, others just looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure whether they should leave or stick around for the drama. "How long for the ambulance?" I asked Samantha, surprised by how weak my voice sounded. 5 minutes, maybe less," she said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "They're sending a full crew with spinal immobilization equipment. You're going to be okay, Everett. We're going to take good care of you." 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, this would all become real in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. In 5 minutes, the ambulance would show up and everyone would have to admit that this wasn't just me being dramatic or attention-seeking or whatever the hell they'd convinced themselves it was. I could already hear the sirens in the distance, getting louder by the second. The sound of my life changing forever, one wail at a time. The sirens got louder until they were right on top of us, then suddenly cut out, leaving this weird silence that felt heavier than all the noise that had come before. I could hear car doors slamming, radio chatter, the sound of equipment being moved around. Professional voices cutting through the suburban quiet like they owned the place. First through the gate was Officer Riley. I could see his name tag when he knelt down next to Samantha. Big guy, probably in his 40s, with the kind of calm demeanor that comes from seeing too much shit to get rattled by anything. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, and he had that cop look in his eyes, the one that misses nothing and judges everything. "What do we have here?" he asked Samantha, but his eyes were already scanning the scene, taking in the wet concrete, the pool, the crowd of overdressed people standing around looking uncomfortable. "Adult male, spinal trauma from a fall," Samantha said, still in full professional mode. "Witnessed event. No sensation or movement below the waist." Riley nodded and pulled out a small notebook. "And you are?" "Samantha Rodriguez, paramedic with Metro West. I'm off duty, but I was here when it happened." The ambulance crew came through the gate next, 2 women in matching Navy uniforms, moving with that practiced efficiency that emergency responders get after years of dealing with other people's worst days. The older one, a black woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, knelt down beside me while her partner started unpacking equipment from a bright yellow bag. "Hi there, I'm Cassidy," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I'm going to be taking care of you today. What's your name, sir?" "Everett," I managed. My mouth felt dry as sand, and my voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Okay, Everett, can you tell me what happened here?" This was it, the moment of truth. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Tracy, Brent, Marissa, all the party guests who'd been laughing just minutes ago. They were all waiting to see what story I'd tell, probably hoping I'd downplay it, make it sound like an accident, keep the peace like I always did. But lying there on those concrete steps, unable to feel half my body, something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the pain, maybe it was the fear, or maybe it was just finally having someone, several someones, who were actually listening to me instead of telling me to walk it off. Brent picked me up and threw me. I said, the words coming out clearer and stronger than I'd expected. I told him no. I told him I didn't want to do it. He grabbed me anyway, spun me around, and threw me backward into these steps. I can't move my legs. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Tracy's jaw drop, could feel Brent's panic radiating across the deck like heat from a fire. This wasn't the story they wanted me to tell. This wasn't me being a good sport about their family fun. Cassidy nodded calmly and looked over at Officer Riley. "You getting this?" "Every word," he said, scribbling in his notebook. Then he looked up at the crowd. "I'm going to need to speak with everyone who witnessed what happened. Nobody leaves until I've gotten statements from all of you." That's when Tracy decided to make her move. She came clicking over in those ridiculous heels, still holding that damn cocktail like it was some kind of prop. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said in that voice she used when she was trying to charm her way out of trouble. "My husband is he's been working a lot of double shifts lately. He's exhausted. Sometimes when he's tired, he gets a little confused, you know?" Confused. She was actually trying to tell a cop that I was confused about what had just happened to my own body. Cassidy didn't even look at Tracy. She was busy checking my pupils with a small flashlight, testing my reflexes, doing all those medical things that were way over my head. Can you wiggle your toes for me, Everett? I tried. Jesus, I tried so hard. I stared down at my feet, willing them to move, concentrating every ounce of energy I had left. But it was like trying to operate a remote control with dead batteries. The signal just wasn't getting through. No, I said, and the word came out smaller than I'd intended. I can't feel them at all. Cassidy exchanged a look with her partner, one of those professional glances that said more than words ever could. Then she looked over at Officer Riley. We need to treat this as a potential assault with serious bodily injury, she said quietly, but not so quietly that I couldn't hear her. This is an accidental trauma. Based on the patient's account and the mechanism of injury, this appears to be intentional. Assault. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Suddenly, this wasn't just a family incident or a party gone wrong. This was a crime scene. Brent must have heard it too, because he started backing away from the group. Now wait just a damn minute, he said, his voice getting higher and more defensive. It was just fooling around. Guys being guys. He's being dramatic like he always is. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are, Officer Riley said without looking up from his notebook. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. And I'm going to need you to stop talking until I'm ready to take your statement. This is bullshit, Brent muttered, but he stopped moving. Cassidy was attaching some kind of monitoring equipment to my chest while her partner prepared what looked like a long yellow board. Everett, we're going to get you immobilized and transported to the hospital. I'm not going to lie to you. This is serious. But you're in good hands now, okay? She was radioing in to dispatch, her voice professional and urgent. Unit 47 requesting police backup at current location. Suspected assault with bodily injury. Patient is a 34-year-old male with apparent spinal cord trauma following alleged physical assault. Everything stopped. The party guests, Tracy's complaining, even Marissa's birthday drama. It all just froze. Because those words made it official. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't horseplay. This wasn't me being dramatic. This was assault. And everyone at this fancy pool party was about to become a witness in a criminal case. Officer Riley looked up from his notebook and surveyed the crowd with those sharp cop eyes. Like I said, nobody leaves. This is now an active investigation. The blue lights from his patrol car were still flashing, casting everything in alternating shadows and harsh light, making the whole scene look surreal, like something from a TV crime show instead of a birthday party in suburbia. But it was real. Finally, terrifyingly, completely real. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens, radio chatter, and Cassidy's steady voice talking me through every bump and turn. They had me strapped to that yellow backboard tighter than a Christmas present, my head immobilized between these foam blocks that made me feel like I was trapped in some kind of medical straitjacket. Every pothole we hit sent a jolt through my body that I could feel in my upper back, but nowhere else. A constant reminder that something was seriously, fundamentally wrong with me. East Haven General looked exactly like every hospital I'd ever seen in movies. All glass and concrete, and that sterile, antiseptic smell that hits you the moment the ambulance doors open. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and I was being wheeled through those automatic doors on a gurney, staring up at fluorescent lights that seemed to stretch on forever. The ER was surprisingly quiet for a Saturday evening. Cool, efficient, with that hushed urgency that hospitals do so well. Nurses in colorful scrubs moved around like they had choreographed every step, and everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing except me. I was just cargo at this point, being transferred from one set of professionals to another like a package being delivered. They wheeled me into a room that smelled like disinfectant and fear. The walls were that hospital beige that's supposed to be calming, but just makes everything feel sterile and cold. There was a clock on the wall that ticked loud enough to count off the seconds of my terror, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot where normal people were living their normal lives. Dr. Neil Patterson introduced himself while the nurses were hooking me up to various machines that beeped and hummed like some kind of electronic orchestra. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with graying hair and the kind of calm bedside manner that probably took years to perfect. Everett, I'm Dr. Patterson, he said, pulling up a chair so he could sit at eye level with me. I understand you've had quite an ordeal today. The paramedics filled me in on what happened, but I'd like to hear it from you. Can you tell me about the fall? So I told him. Again. The whole story, Brent grabbing me, spinning me, throwing me backward onto those concrete steps. The crack I heard when I hit. The way my legs just stopped working. Dr. Patterson listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on his tablet, nodding in all the right places. "We're going to need to get some images," he said when I finished. "Starting with an MRI of your spine. I know that sounds scary, but we need to see exactly what we're dealing with before we can make any decisions about treatment." Scary didn't begin to cover it. I'd never had an MRI before, but I'd heard about them. The loud noises, the confined spaces, the way they could see inside your body and tell you things you didn't want to know. But what choice did I have? I couldn't feel my legs, couldn't move anything below my waist. I needed answers, even if those answers were going to destroy my life. The MRI machine looked like something from a science fiction movie. This huge white tunnel that hummed with barely contained energy. They slid me in there like I was being fed to some kind of technological monster, and for the next 45 minutes, I listened to sounds that belonged in a construction site, not a hospital. Banging, whirring, clicking, like someone was building a house around my head. I tried not to think about what they might find. Tried not to imagine the worst-case scenarios that kept playing in my head like a broken record. Wheelchair, paralysis, never walking again, never being able to work, to support myself, to be anything other than a burden. When they finally pulled me out of that machine, Dr. Patterson was waiting with another doctor. A woman this time, older, with silver hair and the kind of serious expression that makes your stomach drop before anyone says a word. "Everett, this is Dr. Celeste Warren," Dr. Patterson said. "She's our spine specialist, and she's been reviewing your images." Dr. Warren pulled up a chair on the other side of my bed and opened a tablet that showed what looked like cross-sections of my back. Black and white images that meant nothing to me, but apparently told her everything she needed to know. "Everett," she said, her voice gentle but direct, "you have a fresh fracture in your lumbar spine, specifically at the L2 vertebra. That's what's causing your current symptoms." A fracture. I'd broken my back. The words hit me like another fall, another crack against concrete. But Dr. Warren wasn't finished. However, that's not all we found. She swiped to different images on her tablet, pointing to areas that looked damaged even to my untrained eye. "We discovered 3 older fractures in your spine as well. L4, T9, and T11. These are old injuries, Everett. Some of them appear to be months old, possibly even years." The room started spinning. Not metaphorically, literally spinning, like I was back on that pool deck being thrown around by Brent. But this was worse than being thrown. This was my entire past being rewritten in black and white medical images. "Old injuries." I managed to whisper. "Yes," Dr. Patterson said, leaning forward. "All of these fractures show signs of repeated blunt force trauma. They're in different stages of attempted healing, which suggests they occurred at different times over an extended period." Repeated blunt force trauma. The clinical language made it sound so sterile, so objective. But I knew what it meant. All those times Brent had played with me. All those falls downstairs that Tracy said were just me being clumsy. All those times I'd hit walls or furniture during his games and been told I was being dramatic when I complained about the pain. My spine had been keeping score this whole time. Every shove, every throw, every accident that wasn't really an accident. It was all there in those MRI images, documented in bone and tissue like a medical rap sheet. "The trampoline," I said suddenly, the memory hitting me like a physical blow. "Last summer, Brent said we should wrestle on the trampoline. I fell off, hit the frame. Tracy said I was fine. The stairs," I continued, more memories flooding back. 3 months ago, I fell down the stairs at their house. Brent said I tripped, but he was right behind me. I couldn't sit up straight for a week." Dr. Warren and Dr. Patterson exchanged a look that I was starting to recognize. The look that meant they'd seen this before, that they knew exactly what those old fractures represented. "Everett," Dr. Warren said quietly, "your spine is telling us a story. And it's not a story about accidents." The knock on my hospital room door came around 8 that evening, just as the nurses were switching shifts and the hallway was getting that quiet, settled feeling that hospitals get after visiting hours. I was still processing everything the doctors had told me, trying to wrap my head around the fact that my own body had been documenting years of abuse without me even realizing it. "Everett." A woman's voice, professional but not unkind. "I'm Detective Anika Ford with the Metro Police Department. Mind if I come in?" Detective Ford was not what I'd expected. Maybe it was all those cop shows on TV, but I'd been picturing some grizzled old guy with a 5 o'clock shadow and a bad attitude. Instead, she was maybe 40, with short natural hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a simple black blazer and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. Officer Riley asked me to follow up on what happened at the party today, she said, pulling up the visitor's chair and settling in like she had all the time in the world. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said all day. Except the truck's name was Brent, and apparently it's been hitting me for years. She smiled at that. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that said she'd heard worse stories and wasn't shocked by mine. I've been doing this job for 15 years, Everett. I've seen a lot of things. What I'm seeing here tonight is a pattern, and patterns tell stories. She pulled out a tablet and opened what looked like a video file. Before we get into the details, I want to show you something. One of the guests at the party recorded what happened. Are you up for watching it? I nodded, even though part of me didn't want to see it. Didn't want to watch my own humiliation and pain played back in high definition. But another part of me, the part that had been called dramatic and attention-seeking for years, needed to see the proof. The video was shaky, obviously shot on someone's phone, but it captured everything. There I was, standing by the pool in my work clothes, clearly trying to stay out of the way. You could see me backing up when Brent approached, could hear me saying no, could see the exact moment when he grabbed my arm anyway. Let's show the guests some fun. Brent's voice was crystal clear on the recording, loud and boisterous like he was performing for an audience. Then came the spin. Watching it from the outside was somehow worse than living it. I could see how helpless I looked, how completely at Brent's mercy. The way he threw me wasn't playful, it was violent, deliberate, like he was trying to hurt me and didn't care who saw it. The crack when I hit those concrete steps was audible even through the phone's tiny speaker. Sharp and final, like a gunshot. And then came the worst part, the laughter. So much laughter, while I lay there unable to move. Stop being such a baby. Tracy's voice cut through the recording, dripping with contempt and embarrassment. You could see her in the background, rolling her eyes, more concerned about what the other guests thought than about her husband lying motionless in the pool. Detective Ford paused the video. What do you see when you watch this, Everett? I see assault, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I see my brother-in-law attacking me while my wife stood by and let it happen. That's exactly what I see too. She made some notes on her tablet. Officer Riley told me you mentioned this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The doctors showed me your MRI results. 3 old fractures, all consistent with the kind of trauma we just watched. So I told her everything. The trampoline incident where Brent had wrestled me off the edge and I'd hit the metal frame hard enough to crack a rib. Though we hadn't known it was cracked at the time, because Tracy convinced me I was being dramatic about the pain. The stairs at Thanksgiving where Brent had accidentally bumped into me from behind and sent me tumbling down a full flight of concrete steps. The pool party 2 summers ago where he'd held me underwater as a joke until I nearly passed out. Every time, there was an excuse. Every time, it was just Brent being Brent, just family fun that went a little too far. Every time, I was the one being too sensitive, too dramatic, too unable to take a joke. What about your wife? Detective Ford asked. What was her reaction to these incidents? That was the hardest part to talk about. Because while Brent was the one physically hurting me, Tracy was the one who made sure I never fought back, never complained, never stood up for myself. She was the one who convinced me that this was normal, that this was just how her family showed affection. She always took his side, I said. Always. If I complained about getting hurt, she'd tell me I was embarrassing her. If I tried to avoid his games, she'd say I was being antisocial. She made me feel like I was the problem for not wanting to be thrown around by her brother. Detective Ford nodded like she'd heard this story before. That's called enabling, Everett. And in some jurisdictions, it can be considered a form of abuse itself. Your wife had a duty to protect you, and instead she participated in a pattern of harm that went on for years. A pattern of harm. That phrase hit me like another revelation. Because that's exactly what it was. Not a series of accidents or pranks gone wrong, but a deliberate, sustained campaign of violence that had been normalized and excused until I didn't even recognize it as abuse. The good news, Detective Ford continued, is that we have everything we need to make this case. The video evidence is clear and unambiguous. The medical evidence shows a documented pattern of injuries. We have witness statements from the party guests, including the paramedic who treated you. She paused and looked at me directly. Based on the evidence, we're filing charges against Brent for assault with bodily harm. Given the severity of your injuries and the pattern we've uncovered, we're also looking at charges of aggravated assault and potentially domestic violence by proxy. What about Tracy? I asked. That's more complicated, but we're building a case for spousal neglect and obstruction of justice. She actively prevented you from seeking help for previous injuries and created an environment where the abuse could continue unchecked. I felt something I hadn't felt in years: validation. Someone with authority was finally telling me that what had happened to me was wrong, that I wasn't being dramatic or oversensitive, that I deserved better than being used as entertainment by my wife's family. What happens now? I asked. Detective Ford closed her tablet and stood up. Now we make sure this never happens to you again. And we make sure Brent faces consequences for what he's done, not just today, but for years. She handed me her card. If you remember anything else, any other incidents, call me. Your spine has been keeping records, Everett. Now it's time for the legal system to do the same. The news that they'd arrested Brent hit the family like a bomb going off in a quiet neighborhood. I found out around midnight when Tracy came storming into my hospital room, her face red with fury and her voice shaking with the kind of rage I'd seen her direct at store clerks and restaurant servers, but never quite at me. Do you have any idea what you've done? She hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the nurses wouldn't hear, but loud enough that I got the full force of her anger. They arrested my brother, Everett. They put him in handcuffs in front of the neighbors. Mrs. Henderson was outside watering her plants and saw the whole thing. Mrs. Henderson. Of course that's what she was worried about, what the neighbors would think, how this would look to her precious social circle. Not that her husband was lying in a hospital bed with a broken spine, but that the family's reputation might take a hit. Tracy, I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. Don't. Just don't. This is exactly the kind of dramatic bullshit I should have expected from you. You couldn't just let it go, could you? Couldn't just accept that it was an accident and move on like a normal person would. An accident. Even now, even with me lying here paralyzed from the waist down, she was still calling it an accident. Like the MRI images showing years of fractures were somehow my imagination. Like the video evidence was some kind of elaborate hoax I'd staged for attention. The doctors found 3 other fractures in my spine, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Old ones, Tracy. From all those other times your brother played with me. This isn't about one incident. This is about years of abuse that you helped cover up. Her laugh was sharp and bitter, the kind of sound that could cut glass. Abuse? Oh, that's rich. You're calling normal family roughhousing abuse now? Jesus Christ, Everett, no wonder you can't handle a real job or make real friends. You're too busy playing the victim to actually live your life. There it was. The same pattern that had kept me trapped for years, turning my pain into my failure, making my injuries into character flaws, making me the problem for getting hurt instead of addressing the person who was doing the hurting. But something was different now. Maybe it was the painkillers. Maybe it was finally having medical professionals and law enforcement take me seriously. Or maybe it was just that I'd hit rock bottom and had nowhere left to fall. Whatever it was, I found myself speaking up in a way I never had before. He threw me into concrete steps, Tracy. On purpose. And you stood there and watched it happen. You told me to walk it off when I couldn't feel my legs. What kind of wife does that? The kind of wife who's married to a man who makes everything about himself, she shot back. Do you know what this is going to do to my family? To my career? I work in public relations, Everett. How do you think it's going to look when people find out my husband is pressing charges against my brother for playing around at a family party? Her career, her family, her reputation. Not once in this entire conversation had she asked how I was feeling, whether I was in pain, what the doctors had said about my prognosis. It was all about her and how my injury was inconveniencing her life. That's when Officer Riley appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mrs. Henderson, I need to speak with you. Tracy turned toward him with that fake smile she used on authority figures, the one that said she was a reasonable person who could surely work out any misunderstanding. Officer, I think there's been some confusion about what happened today. My husband tends to exaggerate. Ma'am, you're under investigation for spousal neglect and obstruction of justice, Riley said, cutting through her charm offensive like a knife through butter. Detective Ford has been reviewing the case, and your behavior both today and over the past several years suggests a pattern of enabling abuse and preventing your husband from seeking appropriate medical care. The color drained from Tracy's face so fast I thought she might faint. That's ridiculous. I would never. You told a man with a spinal injury to walk it off, Riley continued. You dismissed his pain as attention-seeking behavior. You actively discouraged him from reporting previous injuries. That's not spousal support, ma'am. That's criminal negligence. Tracy looked at me like this was somehow my fault, like I'd orchestrated this whole thing just to make her life difficult. Everett, tell him. Tell him I'm not. Tell him this is all a misunderstanding. But I couldn't, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exactly what it looked like. A woman who'd spent years enabling her brother's violence against her husband because it was easier than confronting the truth about her family. The explosion came around 2 in the morning. Not literally, though it felt like it. But emotionally, when my phone started buzzing with text messages from Tracy's extended family. Marissa was furious that her birthday party had been ruined by my drama. Their parents were threatening to sue me for defamation. Cousins and aunts and uncles I barely knew were weighing in with their opinions about what a troublemaker I was, how I'd always been jealous of Brent, how I was tearing the family apart with my lies. The messages kept coming, each one more vicious than the last. They painted me as a manipulative, attention-seeking liar who'd fabricated years of abuse just to destroy an innocent man's life. They said I was weak, pathetic, undeserving of the Henderson family name. They said Tracy deserved better than a husband who would betray her family like this. I was drowning in their anger, suffocating under the weight of their collective denial, when I heard a knock at my door. Soft, tentative, nothing like the aggressive entrance Tracy had made earlier. Everett. The voice was familiar but distant, like hearing someone calling your name from the other side of a lake. It's Talia, my sister. I hadn't seen Talia in almost 2 years. Not since Tracy had convinced me that she was jealous of our marriage and trying to cause problems between us. Looking back now, I realized that Tracy had been systematically isolating me from anyone who might have questioned what was happening to me. Talia stepped into the room cautiously, like she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. She looked older than I remembered, her brown hair streaked with gray, worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But when she saw me lying there in that hospital bed, her face crumpled with a pain that looked almost physical. "Oh, Everett," she whispered, and suddenly she was beside my bed, taking my hand in both of hers. I heard what happened. I came as soon as I could. "Talia," I said, and to my surprise, my voice came out cracked and broken. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For staying away, for not calling for." "Stop," she said firmly. "You don't apologize to me. I should have tried harder to stay in touch. I should have seen what was happening. I always knew something was off about Tracy, about that whole family, but I didn't know how bad it was." She pulled her chair closer to my bed and leaned forward, her eyes intense and focused. "I want you to know something, Everett. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped worrying about you. And I never believed for 1 second that you deserved the way they treated you. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since I'd married Tracy, someone from my family was telling me that I mattered, that I was worth protecting, that I deserved better than what I'd been getting. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I cried. The surgery came 3 days later. Dr. Warren explained it like she was talking about fixing a car engine, rods and screws and fusion procedures that would stabilize my spine and hopefully give me the best shot at walking again. Best shot being the operative phrase, because nobody could promise me anything except pain and a long road to recovery. I woke up from the anesthesia feeling like I'd been hit by that same truck all over again, except this time it had backed up and run me over a few more times for good measure. The incision in my back felt like someone had taken a blowtorch to my spine, and the drugs they gave me for the pain made everything fuzzy and distant, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was the fear. Every day, I'd stare down at my legs under those hospital blankets and will them to move, to twitch, to give me some sign that the surgery had worked. Some days I swore I could feel something, a tingling or a twinge, but the doctors warned me that phantom sensations were common and didn't necessarily mean anything. That's when Dr. Amelia Rojas entered my life like a drill sergeant in scrubs. She was maybe 5'0" but carried herself like she could bench press a pickup truck, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail and the kind of direct stare that made you sit up straighter even when you were lying flat on your back. "Everett," she said on our first day, "I'm your physical therapist, and I'm going to tell you something right now that might piss you off. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. There are going to be days when you want to quit, when you want to give up and accept that this is as good as it gets. But I'm not going to let you." She was right about it being hard. Jesus Christ, was she right? The first week, all we did was try to get me sitting up without passing out. My balance was shot, my core strength was non-existent, and every movement felt like my spine was being twisted with a wrench. I threw up twice the first day, just from the effort of staying upright. "Your body remembers pain, Dr. Rojas would say during the sessions that left me sweating and shaking. Now we need to teach it to remember strength. Meanwhile, Dr. Priya Jain was working on my head while Dr. Rojas worked on my body. She was younger than I'd expected for a trauma counselor, maybe 35, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that made you feel like you could tell her anything. "You weren't weak," she told me during one of our sessions. "You were systematically manipulated to believe you deserved the treatment you received. That's not weakness, Everett. That's psychological abuse. And it's just as real as the physical injuries." She helped me put words to things I'd never been able to articulate. The way Tracy would gaslight me into thinking my pain wasn't real. The way Brent's games always seemed to escalate when I tried to set boundaries. The way the whole family would close ranks and make me feel crazy for objecting to behavior that any normal person would recognize as abusive. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after surgery. I was in the physical therapy room, strapped into this contraption that was supposed to help me learn to balance again, when Dr. Rojas told me to try to stand. I'd been trying to stand for weeks with no success, my legs hanging like dead weight no matter how hard I concentrated. But something was different that day. When I focused all my energy on pushing down through my feet, I felt something. Not normal sensation, not anything close to what I used to feel, but something. A connection between my brain and my legs that hadn't been there before. "Holy shit," I whispered as I managed to support some of my own weight for about 3 seconds before collapsing back into the safety harness. Dr. Rojas was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "Did you feel that?" "I felt something," I said, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something else too. Hope. The courthouse was nothing like I'd expected. Maybe I'd watched too many legal dramas, but I'd pictured something grand and intimidating. Instead, it was just a regular building with fluorescent lights and worn carpet that smelled like old coffee and anxiety. But walking into that courtroom, with my cane and my unsteady gait, felt like walking into the most important moment of my life. Brent's lawyer was exactly what you'd expect from someone defending a rich kid's assault case. Expensive suit, slicked back hair, and the kind of condescending smile that said he thought this whole thing was beneath him. During opening statements, he painted Brent as a fun-loving family man whose harmless prank had been blown out of proportion by an oversensitive brother-in-law with a history of dramatic behavior. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, gesturing toward Brent like he was showcasing a prize pupil. "This was nothing more than typical family horseplay that unfortunately resulted in an accident. My client never intended to cause harm, and the prosecution's attempt to criminalize normal sibling behavior is frankly ridiculous. Normal sibling behavior. Even in a courtroom, they were still trying to make this my fault for not being able to take a joke. But then the evidence started rolling in, and their story fell apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sandra Martinez, methodically laid out the case piece by piece. First came the video footage from the party, played on a big screen where everyone could see exactly how violent Brent's prank had been. The courtroom was dead silent as they watched me being spun and thrown like a rag doll. You could hear Brent's laughter on the recording, could see the deliberate force he used, could watch the exact moment my body slammed into those concrete steps. There was nothing playful about it. Then came Dr. Warren with the MRI images. She put up those black and white pictures of my spine on a screen and walked the jury through each fracture like she was reading a medical textbook. 3 previous fractures, all consistent with blunt force trauma. L4, T9, T11. These injuries occurred over a period of several years and show a clear pattern of repeated abuse. When it was my turn to testify, I was terrified my voice would shake or I'd stumble over my words. But as I sat in that witness chair, looking out at the jury, something clicked. These people deserve to hear the truth, not the sanitized family version, not the victim-blaming bullshit I'd been fed for years, but the actual truth about what had happened to me. I told them about the trampoline incident, the stairs, the pool games that weren't really games. I explained how every injury had been dismissed. Every complaint had been turned back on me as evidence of my weakness or dramatic nature. Brent didn't just hurt me that day at the pool, I said, my voice steady and clear. He'd been hurting me for years, and my wife's family had been teaching me that it was my fault for not being tough enough to take it. Dr. Jane's testimony was devastating. She explained trauma bonding, gaslighting, and the psychological manipulation that keeps abuse victims trapped in cycles of violence. She made it clear that my reluctance to fight back or report previous incidents wasn't weakness. It was a predictable response to sustained psychological abuse. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Brent's face went white. His lawyer immediately started talking about appeals, but the judge wasn't having it. Mr. Henderson, Judge Patricia Monroe said, looking directly at Brent, you have shown a pattern of violence toward your brother-in-law spanning several years. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and resulted in serious bodily harm. This court sentences you to 5 years in state prison. Tracy got 18 months probation and court-ordered counseling for enabling abuse. As they led Brent away in handcuffs, Judge Monroe's closing words echoed through the courtroom. You mocked his pain, dismissed his suffering, and treated him as less than human. But he survived your cruelty, and now justice has been served. 18 months later, I'm standing in my own kitchen making coffee in my own apartment, and I still can't quite believe this is my life now. The place isn't much, a 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood with hardwood floors that creak when I walk and windows that actually let in sunlight. But it's mine. Nobody here tells me I'm being dramatic when I need to rest my back. Nobody dismisses my pain or makes jokes about my limp. The limp is permanent, according to Dr. Warren. Some days it's barely noticeable. Other days I need the cane to get around without looking like I'm drunk. But I'm walking. Against all odds, against the initial prognosis that had me preparing for life in a wheelchair, I'm walking on my own 2 feet. The job at the Metro Men's Outreach Center started as volunteer work, something Dr. Jane suggested to help me process my own trauma by helping others work through theirs. Turns out, there are a lot of guys out there who've been told their pain doesn't matter, who've been convinced that speaking up about abuse makes them weak or dramatic. You taught me to trust the quiet ones, Samantha told me last week when she stopped by the center. She's working as a trauma nurse now at East Haven General, and she makes a point of really listening to patients who aren't making a lot of noise about their pain. The ones who say they're fine when they're clearly not fine. You taught me that quiet doesn't mean okay. I still get emails from Tracy. She's in therapy now, court-ordered at first, but she says she's continuing it voluntarily. Her messages have evolved from angry blame to something that might eventually resemble an apology, though we're not there yet. Her latest email accused me of wrecking everything by pressing charges, but there was less venom in it than before. Maybe that's progress. I don't respond to her messages anymore. Dr. Jane calls it protective boundaries, and I call it sanity. I didn't wreck anything. I just finally told the truth about what was already broken. The MRI scans are framed on my wall now. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out. Those black and white images of my fractured spine aren't just medical records. They're proof. Proof that I wasn't making it up, wasn't being dramatic, wasn't weak for not fighting back. Every crack in those vertebrae is documentation of survival. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the years I lost, the pain I endured, the family that threw me away rather than acknowledge what they'd done to me. The honest answer is that some days I am angry, but mostly I'm just grateful. Grateful that Samantha knew what she was looking at when I couldn't move my legs. Grateful that Dr. Warren could read the story my spine was telling. Grateful that Detective Ford believed me when I finally found the courage to speak up. I was told to walk it off, to stop being a baby, to quit making everything about me. Now I walk on my own terms, at my own pace, toward a future I'm building for myself. Every step I take is proof that they were wrong about me. My spine may have been broken, but my voice is whole now. And that makes all the difference.